It's November 30th, 1939. Just 3 months after the outbreak of another world war, the Soviet Union has declared war on my home country of Finland. Within days, Soviet troops advanced across the nation, but they had no idea of the resistance they would run into. The negative 45-degree weather, negative 43 degrees centigrade, would be the least of the communist invaders' concerns when they found themselves in my sights. Because I am Simo Hawa, the deadliest sniper in history. I am the White Death. Prior to the war's start, Germany and the Soviet Union had agreed to divide up Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, and Finland landing within the Soviets' reach. Stalin quickly made impossible demands of Finland, including that we cede large amounts of territory along the Finnish-Soviet border, supposedly for security reasons, such as the protection of Leningrad, which lay only 32 kilometers from the border. My nation flatly refused, and the Soviet Union quickly declared war. With 750,000 soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and over 3,000 aircraft, the Soviet military absolutely dwarfed our Finnish military, which was comprised of just 300,000 soldiers, mostly reservists and civil guardsmen, a few dozen tanks and 100 aircraft. Stalin ordered the invasion of Finland, giving no thought to the coming winter, as he assumed his armies would roll over us long before the worst weather set in. Just as Napoleon had underestimated the Russian winter over 100 years before, Stalin too severely underestimated winter weather and the impact it would have on his army. As the unseasonably cold winter of 1940 set in and slowed Stalin's beleaguered armies down in a frozen hell, our Finnish resistance moved in to halt the Soviet advance. Knowing we couldn't match the Soviets on one-on-one basis, we adopted Motti, or what today would be called asymmetrical warfare tactics. We would routinely allow Soviet forces to push deep into our territory, leaving them overextended. Then we'd attack their supply lines while running lightning raids against the Soviet flank. Frozen in by the severe weather and plagued by terrible logistics, the Soviet war machine quickly ground to a halt. But the greatest of the terrors awaiting the Soviets in the winter woods was me, an unassuming 5-foot, 1.5-meter tall farmer named Simo Hawa. I was born in a farming town near the Russian border, and I spent my entire life in the harsh Finnish countryside. As a child, I naturally took to shooting, becoming a prolific hunter and sharpening the marksmanship skills that would make me a legend one day. In 1925, I served a mandatory 1-year term in Finland's army, where I was introduced to an M28-30 rifle, replacing my Russian-made Musin Nagant M91. Honing my shooting skill even further, I was able to achieve a firing rate of 16 shots per minute at the range of 500 feet, 125 meters. Every single one on target. After years of service, I was honorably discharged with the rank of Upsilias Upsilev, or corporal. Years later, I joined the Finnish Civil Guard, and at the outbreak of hostilities in 1939, I was called into active service. I refused the M28-30 rifle the military provided me with though, pulling my trusty M91 out of storage instead. Immediately ordered to the defense of Pieholki, me and my unit dug trenches and strung up barbed wire in preparation for the Soviet assault. That very same night, the Soviets attacked, but we were able to repel the assault. After several days of heavy fighting, we were ordered to withdraw, yet despite the retreat, we suffered relatively few casualties. My next engagement with the Soviets came outside of Suvilhalti, with the Soviets once more suffering heavy losses. Stalin's bloody political purges had decimated military leadership within the Soviet military, and the inexperienced and poorly led Soviet army suffered greatly in the first few weeks of the war for those purges. My extraordinary marksmanship did not go unnoticed by leadership, who soon made me a sniper. After an enemy sniper killed 3 platoon leaders and an NCO, my company commander, Lieutenant Jutta Latnin, ordered me to knock that man out. I replied simply, "I'll do my best." I took off for the woods alone, dressed in thick winter gear and a body-length white hooded coat. Making note of the terrain, I identified the few possible positions that I would choose if I were a Russian sniper, and then selected a spot with good oversight of all of them. Digging into the thick snow in early morning, I lay perfectly still, letting the snow build up around me all day long, not moving for fear of giving my position away. My patience and endurance paid off when finally, towards dusk, I spotted a flicker on the horizon, the telltale glint of the setting sun's rays reflecting off another sniper scope. Moments later, the Russian sniper began to rise, likely returning back to his unit after a long day on alert. Without hesitation, I gently squeezed the trigger and placed a single 7.62 round straight through the enemy sniper's cheek, killing him instantly. My reputation began to spread amongst my fellow troops, and I would soon earn my nickname of the White Death amongst Russian troops. With our unit under fire by a skilled enemy sniper, my lieutenant once more reached out to me with a simple mission: find the sniper and kill him before he can kill more of our own. Just as before, I once again took off into the wilderness alone, carrying a day's worth of food and several pouches of ammunition. Having seen how a scope had given the Russian sniper away, I now refused to use one, and instead stuck only to my reliable M91's iron sights. It was with these iron sights that I spotted and eliminated the Russian sniper from 400 meters away. After that kill, my name spread amongst the Russians, and I became a priority one target. In the months that followed, Soviet forces responded to my attacks by calling in artillery bombardments, devastating dozens of acres of woodland to try to kill just one man. Yet for all their efforts, I was able to survive each bombardment, getting only a minor scratch when a shell landed near my position and tore the back off my greatcoat. In turn, I continued my methodical assassination of Soviet targets undeterred, once knocking out the sniper protecting a forward artillery observer. The observer quickly called in fire support, and over 50 rounds rained down harmlessly around me. But skill with a gun is only one part of becoming a deadly sniper. I would often have to stay in my firing position for hours, sometimes even an entire day. And it's that resilience in the midst of our brutal Finnish winter that made me the stuff of legend. In order not to give away my firing position, I very slowly and carefully moistened the snow around me so it would freeze, preventing puffs of snow from flying up when I fired. When changing firing positions, I would move incredibly slowly, inches per hour, making my movements all but imperceptible to the human eye. In order to prevent steam from my breath from giving me away, I would hold mouthfuls of snow in my mouth, taking slow, deep breaths and letting my breath cool as it left my lungs. And of course, to never inadvertently give myself away due to the low winter sun, I never used a scope, sticking to my tried and true iron sights for even the longest and most difficult of shots. Though I usually worked alone, I did employ the use of a trusted spotter occasionally. Observing Russian movements during the day, we would then take off into the pitch-black night and hunt for a good firing position from where we could enjoy a target-rich environment. Once selected, we would have to sit patiently waiting for the first light of dawn and then begin our long day of precision shooting. I was eventually wounded though, shot by an enemy sniper with an explosive bullet to the left side of my face just 1 week before the end of the Winter War. I awoke in a surgical tent the day the war ended. The bullet left me with a fractured jaw and a lifelong deformity, but I quickly recovered the ability to speak, and more importantly, shoot. With over 500 confirmed kills by the end of the war, my legacy was cemented as the deadliest sniper in history. But ultimately, I am a man of peace, and I refuse to take part in the Finnish-Soviet continuation war, which saw my beloved Finnish forces ally with German forces and invade the Soviet Union in a bid to retake lost territory. For me, my war was done, and I had no interest in invading another man's land the way my own had been.
The year is 1630. I now live in Venice, a once great city-state that for a time was the richest city in Europe, but today is ravaged by a mysterious disease that in just a year claimed the lives of thousands. I cannot let my fear of the epidemic and the horrible fate that awaits the infected overcome me, because I am a plague doctor. I prepare for the day by dressing in a special outfit, tough leather breeches to protect my legs, a long heavy coat that covers my entire body, the wide-brimmed hat that all doctors wear, and of course, my mask. the beak filled with herbs and perfumes to ward off the foul-smelling air of disease. I spend my days traveling to the homes of the sick, checking in on the infected and diagnosing new cases. I employ the most advanced medical knowledge of the day, performing bloodlettings and advising the ill to rub onions on their sores. I use a cane to examine the very sickest of my patients so that I don't have to touch them. Will these techniques work? Will I be able to cure the sick, or at least offer them some comfort in their final moments? Will I be able to find the source of the disease? And most importantly for me, will my precautions protect me from the same fate? This is far from the first plague. The historians tell us that they've occurred for centuries, yet each seems as if the world is finally coming to its end. From the plague of Justina that ravaged the eastern Roman capital of Constantinople to the Black Death that left over a third of Europe dead. Now, 300 years after the last terrible outbreak on the continent, it has reappeared here in Venice. And this plague has hit our city hard. Once a center of culture and commerce, we are seeing our time as a powerful city-state waning. The streets are empty and the shops are barren, with over a third of the population dead or dying. We tried locking the sick away in pest houses, stripping those who show signs of disease on their clothes and possessions and burning them, and even quarantining them to an island in an attempt to do something, anything to stop this spread, but nothing has seemed to work. The number of infected grows by the day, and the death count rises higher and higher. The plague is a true nightmare for those unlucky enough to become stricken by it. Strange swellings appear on the body, especially under the arms and around the groin, growing to the size of apples, and the weeping blood and pus before erupting into painful sores. The body is then overcome with fever and the chills. The patient can keep no food down and is wasted away by diarrhea and vomiting. It can progress so quickly that there's nothing I can do. Often someone goes to sleep healthy with no symptoms and is dead by morning. We are unsure of where the plague came from or how it spreads. Some think it only comes from the touching of an already infected individual. Others believe that spirits jump from the eyes of the sick into those of the healthy, carrying the death with them. As for myself, I believe that the foul air, known as miasma, carried this horrible malady. It is also why the most important piece of equipment is also the one that marks me most clearly as a plague doctor: my mask. Each day, I fill the nose with fresh flowers and herbs, using the pleasant smells to ward off the plague. I coat my clothes in a thick layer of sweat, or animal fat, in order to seal in the fabric and prevent any bad airs from penetrating to my skin. I focus on combating the odor that seems to follow the sick and encouraging the healthy to stay well by staying indoors and surrounding themselves with the pleasant aromas. I employ other techniques on those who are not yet at death's door, such as a bloodletting with the leeches or lancing the swollen boils in an attempt to drain the sickness away, though I must take great care to ensure that none of the potentially deadly fluids touch my skin. I am also cautious not to touch the sickest of patients at all. My cane allows me to examine their bodies from a distance, though when they are at that advanced stage, usually all I can do is direct the family to remove the body from the home when the patient eventually succumbs. Their bodies are added onto the carts that patrol the streets daily. Stacked high with corpses, these carts are dragged along by some poor soul who will no doubt be joining his cargo soon. They're taken out of the city and given a Christian burial if they are lucky, and burned in great piles if they are not. Day after day, I see more and more falling victim to this plague. I dream of a day when we can return Venice to its former glory, where hundreds of trade ships pass through a harbor and princes summon the world's most talented artists to create great works to adorn their palaces. I fear that those days are dead and gone, and that there is little or anyone but God can do to stop this unending march of death. I make the long trek back to the section of the city where my home is, an area that luckily has been largely untouched by the plague. On my way, I stop to pray to St. Mary of Health at the new basilica that has been built in her honor, in hope that more offerings to God will end this catastrophe and perhaps serve as a penance for whatever our worldly deeds have brought this biblical punishment upon us. The day grows long, and I feel very tired, so I make my way home. I take great care when removing my mask, checking that there are no openings where the diseased air may have seeped in. I lay out my roll of tools so that they are ready for another day of tending to the unwell. I carefully remove my coat, my breeches, and am once again just a man. A man who sees that the day I've been dreading yet always anticipating is here. I lift my arm and see it, a swollen lump. It is now only a matter of time.
Here I lie, the strong bull, pleasing of birth, the one of perfect laws, who wears the crown and pleases the gods, Lord of all, now dead. After bearing witness to only 18 floodings of the life-giving sacred waters of the Nile, I am laid to rest in my tomb with the objects that I will need most in the afterlife, my favorite foods, perfumes, weapons of war, and of course, my golden death mask, an everlasting and eternal tribute to my power. For I am a perfect image of humanity, strong, powerful, the savior of Egypt, Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, living God. I am Tutankhamun, but that is not the name by which I was always known. No, it pains me to admit that my father, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, and his sister wife first named me Tutankhamun, living image of the god Aten. My father was a heretic, and above all, a fool. He threw Egypt into great turmoil and distress when he forswore the ancient gods who had guided us since creation, and declared that Aten, the golden disk of the sun, was the true chief deity, and even moved the capital from Thebes to the new city of Akhenaten. My father was judged harshly for his crimes against the gods. Following his death, the cult of Aten diminished. His capital city was abandoned. The temples and monuments he built for his god were torn down. His face was chiseled off of his statues, and his name was erased from the official list of kings, ensuring that his memory would die with him. In the eyes of Egypt, the people, and the gods, my father faced a fate even worse than death. He ceased to exist. I ascended to the throne while I was still a boy, but let there be no doubt that I was always in charge. My advisors may have attempted to take advantage of my youth, but when you are a living incarnation of a god, there is no question who ultimately rules. I immediately took to restoring Egypt to its past glory, fixing the mistakes of my father who had allowed our kingdom to languish as he pursued his blasphemous goals. My first and most important duty was to reject the sun god Aten. For too long, the old gods had been neglected and ceased to hear our prayers. From here on, I would no longer bear the name my father gave me, but be born anew as Tutankhamun, the living image of the true god. I set about the restoration of the old pantheon, Horus, Isis, and of course, my namesake Amun, who would again be worshipped as the chief deities of Egypt and bestow us once more with their blessings. I built temples and monuments dedicated to them, moved our capital back to the sacred city of Thebes, reinstated their holy festivals, reestablished their cults, and brought their divine favor back to Egypt. I would be remembered throughout eternity as the king who spent his life in fashioning images of the gods. Though pious, I was far from meek. While much of my time was dedicated to bringing the gods back to Egypt, I also sought to bring Egypt's military back to its former might. I led my army full of the world's finest archers and charioteers to victory in many battles, where my peerless skill with the bow was put on display for all to see as we slew countless of the neighboring Nubians. Alas, not every chapter of my life was such a resounding success. Neither of the children I bore survived childbirth. Perhaps the gods did not favor my sister wife, Ankhenaten, as they did me. As is our tradition, their bodies were mummified and they would be placed with me in my own tomb, so that we may all live together in the afterlife. My own life was also cut tragically short. Perhaps the gods needed me more in the Dua, the land of the dead, than they did on this mortal plane. But at least I was able to die doing what I loved most in the world, hunting the sacred animals of the Nile. I faced off against an incarnation of the chaos god himself, Seth, here taking the form of an enraged hippopotamus. I crept through the reeds, readying my powerful bow to strike, when suddenly it charged at me, and despite my martial prowess, I was gravely wounded, my leg mangled by the beast. I was rushed back to my palace, but it was too late. The wound festered, and soon I would return to the realm beyond this life and take my place among the gods. The Pharaoh, as well as the entire kingdom's most important task in life, is to make certain that the king has a proper tomb to ensure his successful journey from this world to the next. Though my untimely death meant that the process must be accelerated, my tomb was still given all of the finest trappings of the land, and no expense was spared by the people to leave no doubt that their glorious and loved king would face no troubles on his journey to the underworld. As a living embodiment of a god who led his people to a glorious new age, my tomb and my legacy will last 1,000 floodings of the Nile. Generation after generation will read my name in the list of pharaohs and look upon my face at the monumental temples built to celebrate my magnificence. Unlike my father, who was erased from the annals of our history, I have achieved the greatest glory possible for a pharaoh. I have become eternal. My name will live on forever throughout the ages, and all will know me, for I am Tutankhamun.
You know my name, for you have whispered it in fear for centuries, mindful of the horrors I carved upon history itself. Vlad III, Dracula, son of the dragon, and I will have my throne. My nation will be free at any cost, and I will bow the knee to no man, Hungarian or Turk, emperor or sultan. My story begins with my father, an ambitious man who fought for many years to take his rightful place as the ruler of Wakalia, a nation in what is today southern Romania. Stuck between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, our nation was frequently nothing more than a political tool to be wielded by one side against the other. After having to flee from Hungarian forces, Sultan Mehmed II granted my father the support of a small army with which to retake the Wakalian throne. There was but one condition. Myself and my brother Radu would be left behind as royal hostages, and my father was to pay yearly tribute to the Ottomans, swearing fealty to their rule. With their aid, my father retook the throne, and once more my family ruled, albeit over a land with no true independence, beholden to powers far greater than itself. Predictably, my father would go on to betray the Turks in 1444, when the European powers gathered together to try to stop the Ottoman Empire's expansion into Central Europe. Despite some initial successes, unfortunately for my father, he was inevitably forced into a peace with the greater power. And sick of my father's double-crossing, Lord Hyundai at last invaded Wakalia, chasing my father from the throne and killing him. My eldest brother, Mysiria II, was with my father in the end, and the boyars, rich noblemen of my country, captured the two and put out his eyes with red-hot pokers before burying him alive. I would not quickly forget their hideous violence against my kin, but like my father, I too would have to bide my time. Surprising perhaps most of all to myself, the Sultan did not immediately order Radu and I's deaths after my father's betrayal. The Sultan was always thinking ahead, and saw no use for the murder of the only two legitimate heirs to the Wakalian throne. Instead, he continued to keep us safe in his care, until fate turned in his and my favor. Lord John Hyundai, backed by various European powers, launched once more into a campaign against the Ottoman Empire in 1448, taking with him the impostor king he had placed upon the Wakalian throne, Vladislav II. With Vladislav II, Sultan Mehmed granted me an army with which to re-enter my home and take the throne. Shortly after my return, however, the Ottomans scored a decisive victory against Hyundai's army, albeit at a great cost. The forces lent to me by the Sultan returned to their homes, and with the failure of Hyundai's crusade, I learned that Vladislav II now marched upon Wakalia. A king is no king without an army to defend his right to rule. And sadly, I found myself without said army. Forced to abdicate my rightful throne, I fled into exile, vowing to return and reclaim what was my birthright. For long years, I bowed my time in my exile to the only place friendly to my interests, the Ottoman Empire. I found myself still in favor with the Sultan, though I rankled at the knowledge that to the lecherous old ruler, I was nothing more than a pawn, and my kingdom and my homeland merely pieces of a greater puzzle in the Sultan's ambitions for Europe. My father's death and my own young life had taught me the virtue of patience, however, and patiently I waited, knowing that the ever-evolving conflict between Europe and the Ottoman Empire, between Christianity and Islam, would eventually present an opportunity to return home. That opportunity came in 1456. Vladislav II was no longer as politically useful to the Hungarian Empire as he had been, and Lord Hyundai offered me a chance to reclaim my throne on the condition that I'd remain faithful to Hungary in future conflicts. You may judge me and my father as you wish, but know that I am a loyal man, loyal to my soldiers, my kin, and to my people. But I refuse to be the pawn of greater powers, and my ultimate ambition was always to free my home from the influence of the two kingdoms it found itself between. I swore my fealty to Hungary, knowing even as I took that oath that I would one day break it. With the support of the Empire, I re-entered my homeland for a second time in 1456 and demanded that the impostor King Vladislav II face me in single combat. A king who does not appear great, godlike even before his people, is not long to rule, and despite my obvious physical superiority and weapons training and youth both, the fool agreed to face me rather than hide behind his army, as he and I both knew he must. We matched blades surrounded by a circle of soldiers and boyars alike. Vladislav was a formidable man once, but age had dulled his reflexes, sapped his speed and strength both. I toyed with the fool, my blade repeatedly finding exposed flesh, his blood trampled into the mud underfoot. Cut in a dozen places, the pretender king refused to surrender, and I could see by now in the eyes of the boyars gathered a silent pleading for mercy. Put the fool out of his misery. I could see their eyes saying, "Enough is enough." They had their fill of blood, it seemed. A pity, for I would drown many of them in the deluge of crimson in the weeks and months to come. With a single thrust, I slew the impostor and reclaimed my throne. Patience, as I mentioned, is a hard-earned virtue, and at last it would pay dividends. With my throne secure, I immediately turned upon the wealthy boyars, the very men who years ago had betrayed and murdered my father, plucked the eyes from my eldest brother, and buried him alive. My wrath was immediate, and I put into practice a technique I had learned during my long years of captivity in the Sultan's court. A greased log, sharpened on one end, would be laid on the ground, with the victim made to sit upon the pointed tip and held fast with the use of ropes attached to each leg. The victim and log would then be lifted into the air, the body's weight impaling the victim upon the sharpened stake from below. I watched with no small satisfaction as the men who had murdered my father were each in turn forced to watch the impalement of their wives and children before meeting the fate themselves. Next, I turned this favored punishment of mine onto the ranks of betrayers lurking amongst the psychopaths of my court. Other wealthy noblemen I knew or suspected of plotting behind my back. I would have my kingdom, and I would have it be free of traitorous rats. During my life, I have held no great love for the Turks or the Sultan, and yet I am no fool. Upon retaking my throne, I began the customary yearly tribute to the Ottomans, a move which angered my Hungarian beneficiaries. Yet this tribute would be cut off just years later. My people would not be subject to any foreign power, Hungarian or Ottoman. I knew my move would bring conflict, and I had long ago prepared for a coming war. Using my intimate knowledge of the Ottoman Empire and its forces, I launched a series of lightning raids across the border and into Turkish lands, destroying many key provincial outposts and fortresses that could be used to support an invasion into Wakalia. I took plunder as well, righteous repayment for my years of forced tribute to the Sultan. As I knew would happen, the Ottomans responded in force, and in 1462, an army 150,000 strong marched against me. I had no hope of defeating this larger force in direct conflict, and so I turned the very land of my nation and its people against the invaders. My forces fought a retreating action, forcing the Turks to push even deeper into my lands to secure a decisive victory. Yet as I steadily retreated, I poisoned wells, breached levees, and flooded marshlands, even ordering the evacuation of all people and animals in the path of the Turkish forces. The Sultan and his men would find no crumb or morsel amongst my lands to feed their rumbling bellies, and with supply lines stretched to the breaking point, fatigue settled in. I spread illness amongst their ranks as well, rounding up hordes of lepers, men and women with tuberculosis and other virulent plagues, and marched them directly into the ranks of the invaders. I could not retreat forever though, and late one night, I launched a daring raid into the Sultan's camp itself, though sadly slew instead 2 Grand Viziers and not the head of the snake as I had planned. My forces could not stand against the superior Turks for much longer, even half-starved and beset with all manner of virulence as they were. I would send these invaders a message then, a final warning to leave my lands and never return, on pain of greatest torture. Weeks later, my masterpiece would be revealed to the invaders as they entered the now deserted town of Tagroviste. There, in a field 2,600 meters long and 1,100 meters wide, lay 20,000 souls upon sharpened stakes. Turkish prisoners and civilians both. The great slaughter on full display held row upon row of families strung up together, infants pierced along with their mothers. By the time the Turks found them, the birds had made nest in their entrails. As I have said before, I would see my home free, of both Turks and Hungarians, at any cost. Filled with horror, the Sultan ordered his grand army to retreat, but left a force at the border held by my youngest brother Radu, now turned traitor against his own kin. Born of a gentler persuasion and a natural charisma, Radu managed to do what I could not, and turn public support against me and my rule. Not with threats of violence and grisly displays of torture, but with kind words and promises of solidarity and forgiveness for past transgressions against my family. Radu, the youngest brother I had protected as best as I could for years during our captivity, would now be my undoing, as I lost the support of my people and was once more chased into exile. The value of royal blood has always been greater than gold, for it can buy more readily that which coin often cannot: political stability. I was captured by the Hungarians who imprisoned me as an insurance policy, and once more I found myself biding my time, knowing that in the end, I and only I would be the one to decide my fate and that of my people. In the meantime, I entertained myself with an old hobby and took great delight in the horror of my guards as they discovered the rows of impaled mice and robins which I had lured into my cell. In 1476, nearly 50 years of age, I was released from my prison and once more on the march to reclaim my throne, supported by Hungary. Age and imprisonment had robbed me of youthful vigor and strength, yet I took to the field of battle regardless. I suppose I knew the fight would likely be my last, but I would be the one to write my own ending for the histories, and not the Hungarians or the Turks. Late in 1476, I fell, sword in hand, never to rise again. Yet though my kingdom had eluded me a third time, I had won the greater prize in the end. My name written in the annals of history forevermore. My name is Vlad II Dracula, the son of the dragon, and you know my name, for you whisper yet in fear centuries after my death, mindful of the horrors I inflicted upon my enemies.
Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, the entrance to the underworld. This is where King Xerxes of Persia and his army of hundreds of thousands are headed. He seeks to lay waste to Greece and all of her great city-states. He intends to put all the world under his foot. That is why I'm here, to stop him, to cripple him, or to at least slow him down. Because we are a force of just 300, taking on what is perhaps the largest force ever assembled. But though we are few, I will show him a class of warrior he is not ready to meet. And I will make him suffer, for I am King Leonidas of Sparta. The Persian Empire has long sought to conquer Greece. It is a personal vendetta from the time of King Darius. Nearly 2 decades ago, Athens helped Ionia in a revolt against its Persian occupiers. The revolt was crushed, but Darius never forgave what he called an unprovoked attack by the Athenians. He swore vengeance on them and all of Greece. First, he sent his son-in-law, Mardonius, on a campaign to subjugate the Asian coast. His fleet was caught in a storm, badly damaged, forcing him to return. Then he sent envoys to Greek nations, demanding we pay tribute by sending earth and water back to Persia. Athens and Sparta refused. Both of us executed the messengers. Finally, Darius sent an invasion fleet across the sea. They landed at the Bay of Marathon, 25 miles from Athens. The Athenians marched to meet them, 10,000 of them, plus 1,000 allies from Plataea, against 25,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry from Persia. The Persian cavalry snuck away in the night on ships bound for Athens, but the Athenians remained and attacked the remaining troops in the morning. They easily broke through the flanks. The Persian army fled their ships. By battle's end, the Greek had lost 203 men, the Persians 6,400, and they retreated back to their homeland. The defeat haunted Darius. His thirst for vengeance passed to his son Xerxes, who is now the sole ruler of a kingdom that encompasses 20 provinces, stretching from the Nile to the Oxus. But Xerxes is greedy. For him, half the world is not enough. He wants the whole world, and perhaps even more, for the son to do what the father could not, to destroy the Greeks. I must admit, he had a fantastic plan. A bridge is built across the Hellespont, the channel between the continent and ours, between the Aegean and Black Seas. He intends to march his army across the bridge to Byzantium, to take Thessaly and Macedonia, work his way to Athens, reducing that city to ash, then onwards to the Peloponnese city-states, including Sparta. Xerxes seeks to put all of Greece under his foot. It would not be difficult to do so either, not with his army. His bodyguard alone is made up of 1,000 infantrymen and 1,000 cavalrymen. Following his entourage are Xerxes' favored spearmen, the Immortals, so named because when one is lost, he is immediately replaced with another, so their numbers are never below 10,000. Army and navy, Persians and allies, soldiers and followers, a grand total of at least 1 million, possibly double that, all marching across the Hellespont Bridge, marching into Greece. All of the Greek nations must put aside our many differences and come together if we have any hope to survive. Representatives of 30 city-states met in neutral Corinth. A coalition is formed. Corinth will remain our center. But who will take charge? Who will lead the command? Though Athens spearheaded the movement, other members of the coalition do not trust their leadership. They have a navy, but it is new and untested. And besides, they bear the brunt of Xerxes' enmity. Would we even be in this predicament had they not taken part in the Ionian revolt that so angered Darius? It is decided by all. Athens will not lead. Sparta will take command. After all, it is the only logical choice. We are bred for battle. The day we Spartan men are born, we are washed in wine to strengthen us. If the elders deem us too weak, we are left at the base of Mount Taygetus. The infant that can survive such an ordeal is a true Spartan and returned to his family, but not for long.
At the age of 7, we are sent to be educated through the Agoj. For the next 23 years, we live with, dine with, are educated and train with our fellow men. It is here that we learn the laws of our land, literacy, diplomacy, and most importantly, warfare. We are encouraged to fight each other to see who is the strongest. We go without food, forced to devise our own plans for feeding ourselves or learning to do without. When we exercise outside, the women are encouraged to jeer and berate us for being such poor specimens. It only encourages us to do better. In our 20s, we enjoy active service. By age 30, those who fail the rigors of the Agoj will never become full citizens. But those who succeed are allowed to wed, to vote, to hold office, and still, we must dine with our Agoj brothers every night, forever in the reserves. Ours is the only standing army in all the Greek city-states. Only the royal heirs are exempt from the full experience of Agoj. But I, King Leonidas, am an exception. I grew up among my people, trained with my people. But then, I was never supposed to be king. I was never even supposed to be born. My father was an Exadridius II. For years, he and his queen were without child. She was deemed barren, and the elders of Sparta encouraged him to divorce her and marry again. My father refused, but for the good of the empire, a compromise was reached. His wife would remain queen regent, but a second wife would bear him a son. It worked. The second wife gave birth to a boy, and while she was rarely heard from after, her son would become heir to the throne, Cleomenes. Not long after the birth, my father's first wife became pregnant. Not so barren after all. Indeed, there would be 3 of us in all. Doriaeus, the eldest, myself, and Cleombrotus. We are the sons of the queen, yet we are not firstborn, and therefore not heirs apparent to the throne. And so, we lived and trained and fought like other Spartans. My father ruled for 40 years, and after his death, Cleomenes took the throne. My older brother Dorius refused to be ruled by him, took a group of men to establish a colony in Libya. That colony collapsed within 3 years. He then went to help the city of Croton in its battle against Sybaris, and was killed in battle. Meanwhile, I had grown into manhood. I wed Gorgo, daughter and only child of my half-brother Cleomenes, known throughout the Greek world for her outspoken manner. Athenians and other Greeks consider this impertinent. In Sparta, our women are our equals, free to roam outside their homes, be educated. Gorgo even took part in state affairs. As a child, she famously advised her father against helping the Ionians in their revolt against the Persians. If only the Athenians had her in their court. But Cleomenes was a king who needed as much help as he could get. He started strong, but his increasingly violent and erratic behavior showed evidence of madness. He invaded cities, then abruptly left after fighting was done. He overthrew Athens' tyrant Hippias, only to try to replace him with another tyrant. Following numerous plots to overthrow and remove the co-regent of Sparta, Cleomenes exiled himself, seemingly out of shame, but then began to raise an army of his own. Rather than do battle, Sparta allowed him to return. My brother and I had him imprisoned, for everyone's safety, of course. He was mad, and it was there that he died, choosing to nobly end his own life by flaying himself alive. Rumors abound that he was murdered, that no man can tear himself apart such as he did. But I assure you, he was mad enough to do it. Because he had no male heirs, Cleomenes' title could only pass to the husband of his daughter Gorgo. And so it was that I, Leonidas, third son of Anaxandridius II, and second of his so-called barren wife, became king. As king, it is my duty to lead my soldiers. Our constitution states that a king must be the first on the battlefield and the last to return home. So now, I find myself at Thermopylae, about to face the most powerful army in history. Xerxes will not risk splitting his force, wanting his land troops and naval fleet to remain in each other's sights. That means keeping to the coast, which means if he wants to get into the heart of Greece, he must march through Thermopylae's mountain pass, a route that narrows at points to just 15 meters wide. A bit of good luck for us, as this means the pass can potentially be held by a much smaller force, as thousands of Persians are funneled into the gap. But there's a problem. The Olympic Games are upon us. Every 4 years, the Greek nations come together for a friendly showcase of athletics. The games are dedicated to the mighty Zeus. There is a fear that if any of us misses out, Zeus will be moved to anger and not look after our armies when we need him most. And not only that, now is also the Spartan festival of Carnia, a time where our religious beliefs prevent us from marching into battle until it is over. The full Spartan army will not be available until the next full moon, but if we do not meet the Persians in Thermopylae, we will miss our best chance of delaying their force. Luckily, Spartan law allows for emergencies. I volunteered to lead a reduced army of 300 soldiers. All of them have living sons, so their bloodlines are guaranteed, and each has been handpicked by me. These are the best of the best, the King's Guard. We leave Sparta before the end of Carnia. My co-king Leotychides will mobilize greater forces for the next full moon. On our march to Thermopylae, we pass through Thebes and add another 400 soldiers to our number. When we finally reach Thermopylae, we set to work restoring the stone wall of the middle gate. It is one of 3 gates built by the Phocians, all of which have long fallen into ruin. We will refortify them. As we work and wait for the Persians, the other soldiers from the coalition arrive. Corinth sends 400 men. Philea sends 200, accompanied by 80 more from Mycenae. Arcadia sends 1,120. Thespiae, another 1,000. The locals of the area, the Phocians, add another 1,000 as well. Almost 5,000 soldiers I am now in command of. This will be enough to hold the Persian army off until the end of the Olympiad. It is lucky that the Phocians joined us. They tell me the Persians are closer than we thought, just a day or 2 away. They also tell me of another route through the mountains, a goat track, tricky territory, but the Persians could use it to avoid our forces and attack us from the rear. We can't take any risks. I send the 1,000 Phocians to the pass to protect it, along with 2 of my soldiers. The wall of the middle gate is rebuilt in time, and I keep my Spartans on the outer edge of it. If any Persian scouts see us, they will think we are a force of 300. They will fail to see the thousands of coalition forces on the other side of the gate. Indeed, a scout does come. I see him with my own eyes. It means the Persian army is near. Finally, the day comes. Xerxes has sent his 2 half-brothers against us, leading a force of Midians and Scythians. We shall meet them on the battlefield. I lead 4,000 soldiers deeper into the pass. I take the front line, a wall of men standing shoulder to shoulder. Behind us, a gap. Then, another line of soldiers, repeated. Where the Persians expect 300 Spartans, there are thousands. In full armor, shields in front of us, spears ready, our helmets masking our faces. A wall of anonymous warriors ready to meet our enemy. The Medians come first, armed with short spears and daggers, confidently rushing us, still thinking our numbers are few. They crash into us, but we hold. Our shields are unbreachable. Above our shields, our spears thrust through. They are longer than the Midians' weapons, and they find their targets easily. The dead pile up through the morning and into the afternoon. Xerxes' half-brothers are among the slain. A retreat is called. The Medians flee, but Xerxes has been angered. He intends to bring his full wrath down on us. In place of the fleeing Medians come 10,000 immortals, the elite. It is real fighting this time. We hold them off as long as we can, but the immortals are a fierce foe. As our shield wall begins to falter, we retreat, turning our backs, running. The immortals pursue us, breaking ranks as they attempt to finish us off. As we reach our next formation of soldiers, with a technique practiced since we were boys, we turn as one and continue the battle. It was no retreat, and the immortals are caught off guard. No longer in formation, they are cut down, driven back. And they keep falling for this trick. They have become accustomed to rolling over their foes. They don't expect a retreating army to suddenly turn and continue the fight. They do not expect more Spartans waiting for them. Finally, the Persians make a full recall, forced to retreat back to their camp. The first day of fighting is done. Thousands dead on their side, a mere handful on ours. But much of the battle was fought by Sparta, and we are weary. Tomorrow, the rest of the Greeks will have to prove their mettle on the battlefield. The dawn comes. Day 2. The fighting begins. This time, the other Greek nations take turns at the front, using the same tactic we used yesterday. We fight in close formation. We retreat, causing the enemy to break ranks and pursue us. And then our next line of soldiers takes over, catching the Persians by surprise. Xerxes seems hesitant to use his archers. It seems if he did, he could easily finish us. Yet it appears he wants us alive. He has a reputation for wanting survivors to humiliate and enslave. Folly on his part, fortune on ours.
Thousands more of his men are cut down before he calls for another retreat. So we have 2 days of victory. The next morning, the priest and advisor Megistias makes a ritual sacrifice, as he has every dawn. This time, however, he is concerned. The entrails are blemished. A bad omen. It means death comes with the dawn. Then, messengers from the nearby town of Alpini arrive. During the night, the Persians sent the 10,000 immortals across the mountains, using the goat path. The 1,000 Phocian troops who were supposed to be guarding it didn't even fight. It is our worst fear. The elite immortals on one side of us, the rest of Xerxes' troops on the other. We are cut off, surrounded on both sides. I call a conference. The other commanders want to leave while they still can, rejoin their nation's troops as the Olympiad comes to an end. But I know we must remain, to delay the Persians, to chip away their fighting force, to show Persia, to show Xerxes, to show all of Greece that we can fight. I plead with the commanders to stay. Demophilius of Thespiae pledges to stay with his troops. No one else does, so it is to be the Spartans and the Thespians, as well as the 400 Thebans, who I command to stay. The others leave us. Just 1,700 of us remain. Before long, Xerxes will march on us from the west, the immortals from the east, cutting us off. It is to be a last stand. I lead my men back into the pass. This time, we march further than we have before. On one side, marshland. On the other, sheer cliffs. We make our formation, wider this time. The Persians do not expect us to meet them so close. They are surprised when their detachment, commanded by Xerxes himself, arrives. No more tricks, no more retreats. This time, a fight to the death. And fight we do, with a ferocity never seen before. The Persians have never had to face such a foe, and many flee in fear. Some are driven into the marshes where they drown. Others are trampled by their own men as they seek to retreat. Still others are felled by their own commanding officers' whips. We hold our ground and fight as a unit, endlessly jabbing our spears forward. The Persians that stay to fight are relentless with their daggers and small spears. Our weapons are hacked, broken, the wood splinters, the sharp points lost to the earth. Our spears useless, it is now time for swords. My brothers and I draw our weapons and hack at every enemy soldier that we can, slaying countless numbers. Many fall, but it is overwhelming and... what is that? Something has pierced me. An arrow? I ignore the pain and push forward. Another sharp pain, and another. Yes, it is Persia's famed archers. They have finally taken their stand. I continue swinging my sword, but I know that I am slain. I fall to my knees, blood roaring in my ears as they see the Persians advance. I feel myself being dragged away by my countrymen, and I remember her prophecy. Before coming to Thermopylae, the Oracle of Delphi told us that Sparta would either be completely destroyed or mourn a dead king. A king must die for the nation to survive. The light begins to fade, and a smile forms on my face. We have delayed the Persians just as needed to, and this will be enough time for the other city-states to muster a resistance. And so, we have saved Greece by sacrificing a king. Me, King Leonidas of Sparta, commander of the 300.
It is 1888 and nearing winter. Normally a festive season here in Victorian England with the upcoming Christmas holiday. But this year has been different. Fear and suspicion plague the public as an unidentified serial killer terrorizes the streets of London's East End. Since August, there have been a total of 4 murders believed to have been committed by this single person. And now, another body has just been reported. Likely this killer's 5th victim. The methods used in these killings are unfathomably brutal, and all of the victims have been women, specifically prostitutes. The details of their injuries are almost too gruesome to bear. But I am a detective with the Metropolitan Police's Criminal Investigation Department, and it is my duty to the people of London to thoroughly analyze the evidence with a sound mind. I wonder, will this 5th murder finally give us the information we need to solve these crimes? He has become known as Jack the Ripper. a nickname taken from one of the many letters we've received from the supposed murderer himself, or perhaps even herself. The truth is, we've been left with very few clues about who this killer is. My investigative techniques and abilities have been challenged with the unique nature of these crimes. This isn't the first serial killer we've ever seen, but never before have I encountered killing so random nor so violent. It all began in August, when I investigated the murder of Marianne Nichols. It was notable because of the violence used. Marianne had been left in the middle of an alleyway, her throat cut so deeply she'd almost been decapitated. I attempted to establish a timeline leading up to the crime. The doctor working with us noted that her body was warm, so she had just been killed. I interviewed those nearby, but no one had heard or seen anything during the hour in which she could have been attacked. There was no evidence that she had been moved to this location after her death, no marks or blood along the road, but I considered the possibility. She was taken by ambulance, a simple hand cart, to a mortuary where I could continue my investigation away from the growing crowd. Once there, I discovered that she had also been cut down her abdomen and disemboweled. I went at once to fetch the doctor. Unfortunately, the greatest care is not always taken when it comes to autopsies. Before I could return to the mortuary with the doctor to perform a detailed post-mortem medical examination, 2 workers had stripped Marianne of all her clothes and washed her body. I wonder what missed opportunities we had because of that incident. The investigation expanded quickly the following month, when there were 3 more murdered prostitutes found around the same area of Whitechapel. All had their throats slashed and 2 had been mutilated, just like Marianne. The City of London police joined the case along with several more of our own detectives, and countless volunteer citizens searched for clues. One of the volunteer investigators even received a letter containing part of a kidney, which we believe to be from Catherine Eddowes, the 4th victim. Prior to this case, I had never spent so much time looking for relationships across several crimes. Now it is the first thing I think about. There are other recent murders of women in London that remain unsolved, but as I go through the files and notes, I see that they do not share enough similarities with these other 4 cases. Of course, in time, there's no telling how many murders could be linked back to this single terrorist. It's overwhelmingly frustrating. Forensic science in the late 19th century is quite limited. We cannot identify specific fingerprints or bodily fluids left behind by the perpetrator, as we have no way to properly analyze such physical evidence. Instead, much of my detective work has been quite psychological. I try to understand the killer's motive, look for patterns within the crime scenes and the many letters we receive, and discern what kind of abilities or resources someone would need to commit the crime. I interview as many people as I can, including those near the crime scenes, friends and relatives of the victims, and other prostitutes. Because some of the victims were disemboweled or had body parts removed, I've specifically interrogated butchers, surgeons, and anyone with an advanced knowledge of anatomy as a suspect. But so far, all of my suspects have had alibis. It doesn't help that police morale is at an all-time low. Prior to the murders, we've been dealing with bickering and power struggles between our senior officials. Now, the killer taunts our ineptitude with his letters. The public is completely gripped by paranoia. Xenophobia is rampant. Headlines and stories sensationalize these terrible crimes and cover the newsstands. No doubt the journalists are the only ones benefiting from these attacks as newspaper circulation and sales increase. As is police procedure, we avoid working with or contacting the press. I believe they could put the integrity of the search at risk by releasing classified information. Now it appears that Jack the Ripper has struck again. His 5th victim, a woman named Mary Jane Kelly. I arrived at the scene more determined than ever. I don't think any of us were prepared for the sight we encountered. Peeking through the window into a bedroom, I saw a girl so horribly mutilated that she was not recognizable. She had been skinned, body parts had been hacked apart, organs taken out and butchered, blood was everywhere. Her eyes were still open, staring at us through the window with a look of astonishment. We had a photographer take pictures of the crime scene. I don't think this has ever been done before by our department, and is a big advancement for our investigative process. I wonder how much it matters, as the gruesome image of that victim is burned into my mind. This was by far the most horrific attack. But again, no new clues have led us anywhere. Will the murders get worse? How can they? how many more will suffer? My fellow detectives have begun to develop compelling theories around each of their favorite suspects. But I have to remind myself that theorizing alone will not lead to a conviction nor punishment. This is the difference between the work we do and the newspapers. To guarantee a successful conviction, I need to catch the criminal in the act or be able to extract a confession. And that is a tall order. I worry that, as the months drag on, we will never see justice for these victims. And we will only be left with theories about the mysterious evil that is Jack the Ripper.
It's the 9th of June, 68 AD, and this is the end for me. I have been named an enemy of the people and have been sentenced to death by beating. But I will be the one to determine my own fate, for I am Nero, the Emperor of Rome, singer, performer, musician, and chariot racer. What an artist dies in me. I was once heralded as a generous emperor, bringing about the kind of golden age. Taxes were lowered and the arts were celebrated everywhere. I performed in plays, sang in concerts, and played instruments to my loyal followers. There are even stories that people tell of me playing my lyre while Rome burned in 64 AD. But I will let you judge whether you or not you think I would do such a thing. I even postponed the Olympics in Greece by a year so I could train and race chariots there. However, it seems that good things never last. I'm unsure about how I got to this point, on the verge of suicide, being called a tyrant and enemy of the people. I am the last in line of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, but I was not always called Nero. I was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD, the son of Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbarius and Agrippina the Younger. My father died when I was very young, and my mother remarried, this time her uncle, Emperor Claudius. My mother was a very persuasive woman when she wanted to be, as Claudius adopted me and named me his successor, instead of his own son, Britannicus. I was later wed to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, which only strengthened my claim to the empire. My mother was, of course, thrilled about this. My mother is now dead. In fact, I gave the order for my mother's murder. Such an act is usually frowned upon in Rome, but the murder was actually better received than I had expected. I was left with no other option, you see. It all happened like this. I had been named Emperor of Rome in 54 AD, but I was only 17, and I still wanted to explore my interests. This is when I came up with the genius solution of leaving my two trusted advisors, Burrus and Seneca, and my mother in charge of affairs while I indulged in my passions. The people were happy, and the Senate shared power with me. They had a range of entertainment options to choose from, games, plays, tournaments, and they had an emperor blessed with creativity. The time came, though, when I decided to take more responsibility, which Seneca definitely agreed with. However, my mother was not as keen on this idea. She took this so badly, in fact, that she started to push Britannicus' claim to the throne. Britannicus was younger than me and was reaching the birthday that would mark him as an adult, an age at which he would be able to make a legitimate claim to the empire. Let's just say that her plan failed as Britannicus died suspiciously the day before he could reach that birthday. I banished my mother, but this really did not make much difference. My mother had always looked upon my personal relationships disapprovingly. I did not want to be shackled to my wife Octavia any longer, as she was not providing me with an heir, which made her useless. I started to look elsewhere, which infuriated my mother. She insisted that I could not divorce Octavia, as it would turn the people against me, and also refused to accept the other woman I chose instead. I was fed up with my mother's interfering and deceiving nature, and despite her meddling, I fell in love with a noblewoman, Poppaea Sabina. I had reached my limit. In 59 AD, I began to hear whispers that my mother was plotting to kill me. So I decided to kill her first. I asked my men to sink her boat, but that mission failed. So I stopped with the elaborate schemes and sent them to kill her in her home. I mean, anyone would have done the same in my position. Seneca, one of my closest advisors, assured me that I had made the right decision. Without my mother's interference, I then started to take action and make my own decisions. I started with divorcing my wife Octavia. I later had her executed on the grounds of adultery. Some were very critical of this, saying that I had fabricated the whole thing. But I do know one thing. That was highly convenient, as it meant I could live at long last with my true love Poppaea Sabina, who was already pregnant with my daughter. In January 63 AD, my daughter was born. Finally, I had an heir to my dynasty. But this happiness did not last long, as my daughter died only a few months later. I was distraught, and I think this was a turning point for me. I became filled with anger and rage. The following year, in July of 64 AD, Rome burnt in the Great Fire, which devastated the city and the people within it. I was quick to organize a relief effort to help rebuild the city. But as the center was already burned down, I decided that it was a great opportunity to do something new and wonderful that all the people of Rome could appreciate. So I ordered a grand gold palace built, which would also contain a huge statue of myself. Considering I gave so much back to Rome, I thought it was only fair to give something back to myself. And what is better than having a grand statue of yourself to admire? However, despite my relief efforts, I was still receiving a lot of criticism. I don't think the people of Rome liked the increase in taxes, but what else was I meant to do? People even went as far as to spread rumors saying that I caused the fire and played my lyre and sang in the palace while the city burned. I will let you believe whomever you want. I knew that it was more likely to be the actions of the agitating Christians. I knew there was merit to these rumors and that I must act. I encouraged the persecution of Christians throughout Rome, nailing them to crosses and setting them afire at night to illuminate the great city. Someone had to pay. Even with someone to blame for the fire, people still began to turn against me. I suspected that at parties, people were saying things behind my back, and my own political supporters were growing thin. I tried everything to gain back the people's support. I even gave public performances where I performed plays and sang. I made sure that everyone enjoyed these special performances and that no one was allowed to leave, even if it meant they died while watching. These performances, though, were simply not appreciated. I had to ensure that my position of power remained intact, so I did what anyone else would do in my shoes. I eliminated my opposition by having anyone that opposed me or said anything bad about me executed. Some may think that is harsh, but I did not want to take any chances. I found out about a conspiracy to murder me in 65 AD by some of the Roman officials, so I quickly had them all executed. As you can imagine, I was feeling very anxious at this time, and I experienced a lot of rage. But so would anyone in my position. Unfortunately, sometimes even my wife Poppaea got in the way, like the time when she angered me and I was forced to kick her in the stomach. She had been pregnant and died soon after. But I don't think it was me that killed her. It was just an unfortunate thing. After the death of Poppaea, things turned really dark for me. Revolts were taking place all over the empire, land had been lost, and wars had cost Rome a lot of money. In 68 AD, the current year, I returned home from an extended trip to Greece. Oh, how I love Greece with its Olympic Games. You know, they even started to include artistic challenges just for me? Anyway, I returned home to find the Roman governor Gaius Lilius Vindex of Gaul revolting against my throne. I did not think much of this revolt at the time, and so decided to just ignore it, like so many before. But this turned out to be the end of me. What I did not know was that the governor Galba, who was supported by Governor Gaius, was gaining support within Rome, and the Senate were slowly turning against me in support of him. It was when the Praetorian Guard, whose job it is to protect the emperor, turned against me and renounced me as their emperor that I started to worry. I knew that I had to get out. The Senate named me an enemy of the people, and I fled Rome as quickly as I could. I have since heard that I am to be arrested and beaten to death. Me, a great emperor, talented artistic athlete and musician, Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. I cannot believe that it has come to this. Oh, what an artist dies in me.
Myself and about a dozen young men and women from Guatemala are sitting in the half-light of dusk inside an old barn-turned safe house somewhere in the northern part of Chihuahua, Mexico. We've just finished a small dinner of rice and beans as we sorted through documents and reviewed plans for each of their new lives. We've had the same dinner 3 times in a row. In fact, it's the same thing we've eaten for every meal over the past 3 days. Now we have nothing left to face but a long journey through the night. Everyone is quiet and anxious, except for me. This is the 2nd time I'm going to cross the Rio Grande this week, and probably close to the 100th time this year. It's not a big crowd, and luckily on this trip there's no small children to worry about. But still, I can't let my guard down. What if this is the crossing that goes wrong? What if I let down all these people who have put their trust, their faith, and the few dollars they have in my care? Because I am what some people call a coyote, a smuggler, bringing migrants north across the Mexico-US border. Some people may scoff at this lifestyle, but the truth is I am supplying a valuable service for which there is an extremely high demand. I've heard that the business of getting people across the United States southern border is estimated to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are many dangers and challenges associated with crossing the border. Getting someone to their destination in America both successfully and safely involves a complex understanding of routes and logistics that only those with proven experience possess. If you set out on your own, with no experience, and try to make the same trek that many coyotes do regularly, you'd be dead within a day, maybe 2 if you're lucky. As a coyote, I'm just one part of a larger network of smugglers, document forgers, business owners, and government conspirators who all work together, each doing our own part to bring migrants across huge distances and without detection. My specific role of leading groups over the actual border, while crucial to the whole system, and the role it seems the media focuses on more than any other, is still just one piece of the puzzle. I began work as a coyote just a few years after I myself first came to the United States. I was living in McAllen, Texas, a border town near the Gulf, and working as a day laborer to send money back home to my family in the Mexican state of Oaxaca. I had made trips home and back to Texas a few times at this point, when I was made an offer by the very smuggler I had first paid to bring me into the United States. I had worked many times with this coyote's brother since living in Texas, and he recommended me as someone capable and eager to take on this hard work. The migrant smuggling business was booming, and they needed more guides. I greatly appreciated this offer, as he knew I had been dreaming of a way to make more money, as I was barely making enough to survive on the wages I made as a hired hand, and not nearly as much as I need to be able to support my family back in Mexico. Although I was scared and somewhat skeptical about the new risks that this job would entail, I could not ignore that this was an incredible financial opportunity, and likely the only one that might offer me and my family a chance at a better life. Most people understand that our main service is to escort undocumented migrants into America. Our most used methods of travel include simply trekking by foot, utilizing secret underground tunnels, coming by truck, or a combination of all 3. Routes shift regularly, based on the information we receive about where border control is currently applying the most pressure. Routes that have worked for years are suddenly no longer an option after Border Patrol figures out they're regularly used, and coyotes are often forced to go far off the beaten path into the desert to avoid detection, significantly increasing the danger. During my first year in this industry, I simply helped other coyotes work out their routes within Mexico. Our network connects routes through Central America, and there are others that go even further south. But I worked hard, and now I am personally guiding my own groups from this safe house and directly over the border into the US. Depending on the point of origin, the cost of our services can vary from a couple thousand for those covering less distance from Mexico, or to well over $10,000 for those much further south. For many, this is their entire life savings, or even that of their entire family, who all pulled everything that they had to give their son or daughter or nephew a chance. On average, I take groups ranging in size from a large family to a couple dozen. Too many, and it is difficult to manage, but too few is not a good profit. And it isn't just Latin Americans I take. Some people come from even further. Migrants as far away as Africa and Asia make their way to the US via our routes, because it is easier for them to find a way into South America than it is to enter North America from their homeland.
Everyone risks their lives to make these long and expensive journeys for different reasons. But most of the ones I talk to are trying to escape poverty, violence, persecution, war-torn communities, or even natural disasters. Transportation is not our only service, though. We also provide documents, stolen passports, fake IDs, stolen social security numbers, and other fraudulent documents that can help them greatly once they're finally in America. Sometimes if the picture on a stolen ID matches our client well enough, they can even be smuggled through official border crossings. But this is rare. And though it's by far the easiest path into America, it carries its own risk when you walk into a building full of border agents. We can also connect migrants with business owners in the States that are looking for employees, willing to look the other way, and eager for more affordable labor. We even bribe government workers on both sides of the border. But the most crucial task we must absolutely do is off the drug cartels. They are the ones truly in control of the border, and not paying them would result in death. Personally, I treat my clients with the utmost respect, taking even more special care with the elderly, the young, and the female migrants. They are the most vulnerable to assault and abuse along the route. For me to allow women and children harm would not only tarnish my business reputation as a reputable coyote, but it would also create situations that could jeopardize my control and safe management of each group I transport. Still, neglect and abuse coyotes do exist. After all, the people making this journey are desperate. Hostage situations, extortion, and abuse, or all kinds, are just some of the many risks people take on when immigrating and when working with coyotes. Sadly, many don't realize this until they are already in a bad situation, but can't turn back and are forced to continue this harsh journey. Some coyotes are just con artists, having migrants pay thousands upfront early on the journey, only to never even make it across Mexico. Generally, migrants pay us in stages along the way. Mostly, I spend time telling the groups I lead how imperative it is that they remain silent, extremely silent, and to be prepared to stay still and wait for up to several hours in uncomfortable outdoor conditions. When you've just spent weeks being cold, tired, hungry, or scared, it can be difficult to keep yourself under control like this. The truth of the matter, though, is if we are caught, there are, in reality, not that many negative consequences. Clients are instructed to never, ever reveal who their coyote was. It would do them no benefit to identify us anyway. It's not like they would be granted citizenship just for cooperating. And it is always the same result. They are detained or deported. However, if I was caught, well, I can simply pose as a regular migrant. Just another one of the group who paid some other coyote to bring me across the border. And no, I don't know what they look like or even what their name is. It is extremely unlikely that I would be charged with a serious crime, and I would likely just be deported. This is what makes migrant smuggling so much more appealing than trafficking drugs or weapons. Though many other people and organizations moving migrants are involved in these markets as well. Still, it is a lucrative business, but I must remember that the truth is, those I work with are criminals. I have to remind myself to be alert and ready to defend myself as, in a way, I am putting myself at risk by association. And of course, one never knows what kind of people my clients are. There's a chance that they too are criminals or violent. At the very least, I know that they are desperate, and that for this brief period, my being alive is the only thing that will help them make it. After all, I too am desperate. As my group makes their way in the dark, perfectly silent, just as instructed, I still feel a rush of adrenaline just like I did the very first time I crossed the border. Maybe this is because the routes change every time. It always feels different. Or maybe the nerves just never fully go away. The weight of the night gets to you on these silent walks, even though it's not likely. I've always feared that right before we cross, someone, perhaps people from the cartel who have a debt to collect, or even law enforcement officers, would emerge from this darkness and surprise us with an attack, ending my life. Would my family ever find out what happened to me? The money that this job has given me is what I always dreamed of, and now my family even resides with me in Texas. But at this point, I probably have enough financial security to quit and continue with my life in America by doing more honest work. After being poor for most of my life, I am only just now starting to accept that maybe I don't need to take these risky trips so often. Now I also worry that the consequences of my actions will become more severe in today's shifting political climate. Once we make it across the river, this time we floated on a set of old tires lashed together like a raft, much more awkward than some of the inflatable boats we use. I can suddenly feel the excitement among the other travelers. I can sense it even in the dark quiet. The journey is not over, but for these people who have come so far, the anticipation and hope is overflowing. From here, we will trek to a meeting place where an American trucker will drive us to a safe house at a Texas cattle ranch. I look around at their faces shining in the moonlight. The grueling walks, the lack of sleep, the meager amounts of food. I can read in their smiling eyes that it all has been worth it for them. All the thoughts I had about quitting this week have vanished from my mind. The mood is too hopeful now.